yesterday I was in Kansas City speaking for NAIC, which was a group of all the insurance commissioners from across the country, about 600 people. A really fascinating conference. And I do, this is pretty much all I do. I do 40 or 50 events every year in all sorts of different parts of the world and all sorts of different industries. So I'm not an insurance-specific person. I'm in many different industries in many different parts of the world. And one of the most fascinating things for me, I love what I do. I love it. And learning a little bit about all these different industries, it's unbelievable the kind of the insights you can gain from that. And I'm always amazed, of course, at how different all these different industries are and the different circumstances they have. But at the same time, what's maybe more surprising is how much they're really just the same. And everyone's kind of facing the same challenges. And a big part of that today is technology. So I focus on technology trends. That's why I've been following that. I've been doing this full time for 12 years. And this is ubiquitous across every industry. In fact, you know, I'm always going to meet these different people in different conferences and so on. And everyone always says, we're way behind. Right? It's not true. Everyone's kind of in the same place, except for maybe Google and Apple and Facebook. They're on the cutting edge, but everyone else is fighting like crazy to try and keep up with the times, and it's accelerating, right? So I see that message everywhere, and I always tell people we have to stay aggressive, we have to stay proactive, but don't feel like you're behind. I think, in fact, this particular audience is ahead in a whole bunch of different ways. Again, I'm not in the group, but I've heard a lot about it kind of from the outside. But anyway, I don't want to bore you with a whole bunch of charts today, but I do want to show you a couple. And the first one, we've heard about this sort of thing for a long time, but I want to just really highlight the scale of what we're talking about. And the topic here is the cost of storing 1 terabyte of data, right? Simple enough. So in the year 2000, the cost of storing 1 terabyte of data was approximately $17,000. So does anyone want to hazard a guess on what we're expected to pay next year? 0.1 cent. Okay, you're going to make my job hard. The right answer is $3. So, and then this is crazy. It's not just happening in data storage. It's happening in data bandwidth, data processing, and data storage, which are the 3 pillars of technology. That's why we're seeing this whole explosion, is that the cost function is collapsing. It's getting cheaper and cheaper, right? And so the change is affecting every industry, and it's affecting every different product category and service category. It's more and more. Your competitors in the future are all going to be technology companies. I mean, that's what it's becoming. These technology companies they see what's happening because they own the platform, right? Like think about Amazon Web Services, right? They've got all these people running their businesses off of their servers. They can see which business models are doing well, which ones aren't. So it's very easy for them to cherry pick the industries that are profitable, doing well, growing, well suited to their expertise, and knock them off one after another, right? So it's really an incredible thing, and it's an exponential environment. And as human beings, we are hardwired to think in linear terms. So I want to talk about that in just a few minutes. The exponential nature of this is incredible. But the collapsing cost structure in technology, that's of course the genesis behind the big data movement. If it's cheaper to get the data and store the data and process the data, then of course everyone's going to just try and get more and more of it. Now that's turned to a form of currency. It's all about data. That's the beginning of the Internet of Things, the IoT. Some people refer to it as M2M, machine to machine. Estimates now that we're going to actually beat the previous estimate of 50 billion devices connected by 2020. We're butting up against that now, so we're going to surpass that. And so there's all these sensors being developed for every possible application, right? There's companies specializing in all this stuff. And one of the most interesting areas to look at actually is the whole area of facilities management. So even a room like this probably has 100 sensors measuring all sorts of different things. One of the best examples of facilities management today is the Hudson Yards facility going up in New York City. Anyone here from New York, just out of curiosity? What a great city. The architecture going up in New York right now, it's totally redefining the skyline. Really interesting to see, and Hudson Yards is a part of it. 19 towers, some of them are up already. It's going to be the most censored residential environment in the world when it finally opens. But of course, that title won't be held long, because there's a million other projects in the world that are going to be even more by the time they open, right? But with these added sensors, right, you can start to detect anomalies, you can start to mitigate risk, right? And then if you've got the sensors in the wearable tech space, and increasingly some of that technology is starting to detect whether or not the people are smokers, for example, or if they're eating their vegetables, right? And a whole host of other medical metrics. So this is absolutely going to be fundamental in the insurance space. I mean, this data is going to have a dramatic impact, already has, right? So you have startups coming into the space that are providing risk mitigating services, right? There's a whole host of that. And by the way, we're just getting started, right? Because the deployment of 5G is going to change the whole thing. The bandwidth increases, the power required. So we're talking about sensors, little plastic sensors that can, in some cases, they can get their power from a Wi-Fi network. So they don't have to be connected to anything. They can just be stuck on a wall or a machine or whatever, and they have enough power to measure whatever it is they're measuring and send the data. These things are like $1 each, even cheaper. So we're going to see an explosion of sensors. Like we've got 50 billion now. We are just getting started. There's going to be sensors on everything going forward. Right? And so then the emphasis transitioned over into the dashboards and data visualization. How can you interpret all this data? There's incredible things going on. I'm sure many of you have dashboards like this that you're looking at. And so it allows people to start to understand what's going on, right? Lowering the risk, right? How do we lower the risk and therefore make insurance cheaper across the board because there's fewer catastrophic events, right? And then we've seen a big revolution in the retail space, of course. Retail is dying, sadly. Right? Amazon is completely changing the game. And people talk about the Amazon effect, which is an amazing thing, right? Because we're all B2C and B2B. People are starting to expect those higher levels of service that they've grown accustomed to with Amazon. Right? And so you bring it into the fintech space, and we have these new players coming on board that are redefining the products, bank accounts and investment accounts that we've had for generations, but they're doing it in a new way, right? Engaging with their customer in a cleaner portal, right? Better optimized, more intuitive portal. And then you go into the insuretech space, and you've got companies like Hippo, right? Redefining homeowners insurance, engaging with the customers differently than we used to, right? And these other companies, this Lemonade, accelerating how fast we pay claims. It's unbelievable the amount of innovation that's happening. And then even the qualification process is accelerating with companies. These are all just startups, and this is not an exhaustive list. There's so many of them out there. But life insurance, you answer 12 questions and let AI do the rest, and you just qualified, right? And then there's whole new categories of insurance as well, which is the on-demand space and single item insurance, all sorts of creative products where you can get insurance for literally just one specific thing. Dengue fever insurance for $10. Unbelievable, right? When in the peer-to-peer space, insurance is coming online. And finally, just to kind of put a cap on the whole thing, we've got a flood of innovation that's coming in from China where, this is WeChat Pay here, and you've got Alipay as well. China has 50 times more mobile payments per year than we have here in the US. 50 times, not double, not triple, not 10-fold, 20-fold, 50 times. Right? So they've got way more data. That's a huge advantage, right? And then you've got new players over there that are redefining the insurance space, online only. So it truly is an exponential space, right? Exponential environment, that's what we're a part of. That's what we get to live through, right? Guys, I'm a left-brain data nerd. So I don't know how many of you are nerds or geeks, but I'm one of them. And these are exciting times. It can be intimidating, but it can be exciting at the same time. So I want to talk about the exponential thing because, I do this myself. I literally spend all day, every day trying to stay in front of these trends and understand what's going on. And I always have to coach, no, what if it was 10 times as powerful as it is today? How would that change? Or better yet, think about the most expensive technology that you're implementing in your firms right now. Right? What if that technology was 1/100th of the cost that you're paying? How many of your competitors would use it then? Right? And it's not a natural thing. It's counterintuitive because the numbers get crazy too quick. It's hard for your brain to follow along. So I have another example, and again, this is an example you've all heard before, but I want to really point out the scale of what's happening. So of course I'm talking about the Human Genome Project, which started in 1990. 1990. I graduated high school in 1989, so I'm dating myself. I'm 48 years old. Anyway, they started it in 1990. 7 years later, they were 1% complete. And all the pundits came out of the woodwork, and they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to need 700 years. Right? If it took 7 years to get it. But of course, that's not what happened. And there's some people who are really good at thinking exponentially, by the way. Ray Kurzweil is a very good example. I'm sure some of you follow Ray Kurzweil. For those of you who don't know, he's the guy who wrote The Singularity is Near. And he works for Google today. Eccentric guy, but very interesting and extraordinarily accurate. Anyway, so he said, check this out. He said, if we're at 1%, we're almost done. That's fascinating. If we're at 1%, if we're at 1%, we're halfway there. Because if you're scaling at 100% per year, okay, so it's doubling every year. If you're scaling at 100% per year, how many years does it take to get from 1% to 100? 6.5. It's only 6.5 years, right? 1 to 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. That's the 5th year. 64. 7th year, you're over the top. Like, how's that possible? I mean, seriously, when you think about it, it's so crazy. It doesn't seem possible. And that's exactly how it played out. In fact, we actually finished it slightly ahead of that schedule, which means that it was scaling at a little bit more than 100% each year. Now, I'm not saying everything's scaling at that rate. Right? Moore's law has slowed down dramatically. Solar power, just for relative comparison, accounts for about 0.8% of global energy production today, and it's scaling at about 25% per year. Meanwhile, energy consumption is going up at about 1.8% per year. Anyway, I'm being a math nerd, but if you draw the lines out, if the trends continue, and we don't know if they will, but if the trends continue, then solar could feasibly satisfy global energy consumption by 2041. We'll see. We got to walk the path. But it's pretty incredible. But anyway, that's what's happening is these technologies are propagating at an accelerating pace. So this is a graph of a whole bunch of different technologies that have come on board over the last 120 years. And it shows when they, from the genesis, when it first deployed, how long did it take to get up to, most people count 80% as kind of broad market adoption. So how long does it take to get to 80%? And you can see that as we get to the present day, they're just getting steeper and steeper. These new technologies are coming really, really quick. So there's a lot of, of course, this is affecting the length of the average tenure on the S&P 500, for example. It used to be like 65 years. Today it's 14. There was a study that came out of Washington University that said that 40% of S&P 500 companies are going to be gone by 2026. Is that possible? It's crazy when you think about it. And we don't know. We have to, you can make predictions, but it's, to a large extent, predicting the future is a fool's game. But it's possible that we could get there. And here's the problem. And this is, I see this face to face like every day. The executives in all these companies and all these industries, and they all say that they're behind, and they're terrified, right? They're terrified that this is coming too quick and they're not going to be able to catch up. And they're thinking, inevitably, behind every decision, they're thinking, who's going to eat my lunch? Right? Who's going to come and eat my lunch? Who's going to steal my revenue? And I think, this is like my whole, I almost think it's this is like my mission. It is exactly the wrong approach, right? And I know it's a flawed metaphor, okay? But what we should be saying is, who else's lunch can we eat? Right? Because if you think about it, if 40% of the S&P 500 companies are gone, and again, I'm not going to debate whether or not that's an accurate prediction, but let's just pretend that it plays out that way. It's not like the economy is going to shrink by 40%. The economy is going to be there. So if these big companies falter, and some of them, who's going to take their place? Who's going to take their place? That's what's happening. All those startups I just showed a second ago with Hippo and Lemonade and all these people, right? These people are nipping in, my gosh, in this industry in particular, because there's so much money involved, right? The financial incentive is huge. And there's tons of investment coming in from everywhere. Lived in the Bay Area for 18 years, and the VC folks down on Sand Hill Road and private equity, my gosh, they're pouring money into this because they know if they hit one, it's going to be a home run. There's so much money involved, right? So all these companies are nipping in at the revenue that you've got, right? That's what's happening. So we can play that game too. The bigger companies can play that game too. But we have to stay on offense, right? We have to stay on offense. We have to look for new revenue opportunities. We're going to talk about that later. There's so much stuff. My gosh, change creates opportunity. When other people are floundering and failing, that's an opportunity to expand horizontally across the industry chain, vertically through the supply chain, all sorts of stuff you can do. So what I invite you to do, it's a short session, just take a step back. I know you all I know you're all senior managers, from what I understand, C-suite and insurance companies, but just take a step back and let me just share some of the stuff that I study this stuff every day. I got so much. I could keep you here for 4 days. I have so much stuff, but don't worry, I won't. I got a timer. It's right here telling me how much time I got left, so we're good. But I want to start off with a quick story. Just out of curiosity, how many of you recognize either of these two guys? Nice. Wow, we got one guy. Love it. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, we'll start with the guy on the left. His name is Brian Acton. And in 2009, Brian Acton was looking for a job in the Bay Area, and he applied to both Facebook and Twitter, and they both turned him down. And he's if you follow, I've been following this guy for a long time. He's actually he's a nice guy, he's a gracious guy. And he wrote a tweet about it at the time, which went like this. He said, "Facebook turned me down. Great opportunity to connect with some fantastic people. Looking forward to life's next adventure." And what might that be? Don't say it. He got together with a friend of his and started WhatsApp, which they grew, right, over the course of 5 years and sold to none other than Facebook for a cool $19 billion. So I'm bitter. I admit it. I'm 48. He's a lot younger than I am. Anyway, so the pundits came out in full force again. This is what the pundits do. And there's a lot of different ways. This was a record-breaking transaction. I mean, it was a big deal. When this thing launched, I mean, it was huge. Anyway, so they came out. They're on the evening news, and there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. One way is that at the time of the sale, WhatsApp had 55 employees. So by that measure, Facebook paid $345 million per employee. Incredible. Another way, that is that at the time of the sale, WhatsApp had an average of 450 million active monthly users. So by that measure, Facebook paid $42 per user. Either way, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Maybe the most interesting way to look at this transaction, though, is that, right, we're talking about 5 years. Like 5 years ago was 2014. 2014 feels like yesterday to me. I mean, it just does, it's crazy. And so the 55 employees managed to engage over 450 million active monthly users over 5 years. How many people are in this room? Like 250 maybe? I don't know, 200? 55, like a little group like that. Builds something in 5 years that touches the lives of 500 million people. And this speaks to the leverage that's in the system today. And listen, anytime you hear a speaker, wherever, conferences, he or she always has a few like really key messages that they're hoping that you're going to walk away with. This is one of mine, okay? There's more and more leverage in the system all the time. Every year, there's more leverage. It's financial leverage, there's different types of leverage. But the biggest example in the room is technology. Right? Technology is a form of leverage. Right? In fact, one of the gentlemen on the panel just said that a second ago. It's a lever. Right? Technology is a form. So the stories that we hear of like the division between rich and poor and all that, number one, those stories are true. It's widening quickly right now. But a lot of it is because of this, not all, but a lot of it is because of this leverage. It's because some people and some companies are leveraging the technology, and for the most part they're doing really well, not all, but many, right? And on the other side, there's a ton of people and a ton of companies that are not leveraging the technology, and in fact, they're basically being leveraged by the technology, right? In other words, other people are using technology against them, right? That's what these startups are doing. And in those cases, it's harder and harder every year to have the same performance that you had last year, right? You're swimming upstream. In other words, we have to run towards the technology. We can't run away from it, right? Data analytics is a form of leverage. You can leverage data analytics. We have to find as many uses as possible to leverage data analytics, right? 5G is a form of leverage. We can leverage 5G, right? We can leverage robotics, right? Robotics, my gosh, this stuff's showing up all over the place. You see them in hotels, right? You see them in shopping malls, security robots and information robots in airports. In fact, those are leading indicators right there. You can model the future because you've got these big institutions like stadiums and hospitals and shopping malls and whatever, hotels, airports. They've got a larger financial incentive because they're processing higher numbers of people, so they deploy the technology first, or they test it first, and we see if it works. But we all can go to those sorts of facilities and see what technology they're using and have that as a proxy of what's likely to be used in smaller facilities, smaller businesses, and maybe eventually in people's homes down the road. Right? That's what I always try to do, is I try to find models. How can we see what could be coming down the road? Right? This is all part of the robotic process automation. I'm sure you guys are all doing stuff in RPA. It's crazy what's happening there. People think it's the future, but it's already happened. One of the best examples, look at this. This is the UBS trading floor, 2005, 2016. Look at this. The place used to be packed with people. They're gone. What happened to those jobs? It's algorithmic trading. It's algorithmic trading platform. It's all been automated. Right? You don't need the people anymore, right? So these are examples of leverage. But there's really two in particular that, and again, it's a short session, so it's two in particular that I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper in. And the first one is machine learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? Those two go hand in hand. And the second is blockchain. And you guys are in the cutting edge of blockchain. You're doing some really cool stuff, which I think is awesome. Some of that was told about it, Andrew, right? Yeah, he was telling me just an hour ago. Really fascinating. But let's start with artificial intelligence. So, and this is where everyone always starts. What constitutes artificial intelligence? Like, most of it's just good analytics. This is a good algorithm. Like, what actually makes it artificial intelligence? And there's generally two, I mean, people debate these things, but there's generally two things that people look at. And the first is that it should involve some level of human level comprehension, right? Something that appears human level. And secondly, more importantly, it has to have the ability to learn. That's the big one, right? Does the platform have the ability to learn from the data that it's accumulating and other data that's added to the mix? So what was the early winner of artificial intelligence? Well, the big one was the recommendation engines. And this is kind of old news at this point. Like, it was started, 8 years ago. But you go to Amazon and it says, you might be interested in these other things, or if you're watching Netflix, it'll suggest movies, and the same thing on Pandora and so on. But this is starting to come right into, it's not just insurance, but just all the different industries, because this is all driving getting people the right product at the right time. It's just predictive analytics, right? Understanding the customer journey. And there's been a lot of case histories. I do a ton of stuff for credit unions. I don't know how credit unions have so much money. They have more. I used to think insurance had more conferences than any other industry. I think credit unions have you beat. They have conferences like, I'm going to the Bahamas in July for a credit union conference. Unbelievable. Anyway, they have case histories. Like, am I complaining? No. But that stuff costs money, right? It's incredible. You should see the hotel. Anyway. I love what I do. Did I mention that? So there was a thing, son of a gun, I forget. Anyway, there was a credit union that all they did, listen to the simplicity is deceptive. All they did was look at the services that they offer, products and services that they offer, and they looked at them on a branch by branch basis, assuming that different neighborhoods have different sales profiles. There's different demographics, whatever. It's just natural that they would be buying different things. So all they did was make the POP sales posters and signage in their credit unions match the product mix of what was actually selling in those credit unions. And the sales increased 12%. Just by matching the signage. How insane is that? Right, so, and then you can get way more sophisticated than that, but that's what's happening, is understanding the customer journey. Have these people interacted with us in the past? Right, was that a good interaction, a bad interaction? Did they buy something? What are they likely? How old are they? What stage of life are they at? And giving them the right product to the right place. So you can optimize stuff, right? You can lower risk. Predictive analytics is being used to lower risk. We mentioned that before. And then here's the conversion funnels on you optimize your conversion funnel on your website, you're lowering the cost of acquisition. And in this industry, if you lower the cost of acquisition, that's everything, right? You own the whole space if you can lower the cost of acquisition because it's so darn high, right? And then predictive analytics is being used to hire people. What attributes are likely to lead to success in an insurance space, right? So this is happening all over the place. It's all predictive analytics, right? That's a huge artificial intelligence piece, but it's not the only one. So you also have object and image recognition, including facial recognition, right? They're using that now in the TSA or the security deals. In fact, when I was just in Amsterdam and I went to board my flight, and you just walk up to, these Northern Europeans, I mean, bless their heart, they're incredible people, but they're like robots. Like, they don't talk like people. They're just like, you go here and go, But you go up and it's got the gate and it's got a camera. It looks at your face and it knows if you're the right person. The gate's open. It's unbelievable, right? But object recognition is also being used in advanced manufacturing for noticing defects and things. And of course, you get closer to home for this industry. It's being used, analyzing x-rays and all sorts of scans in the body. It's incredible what artificial intelligence is able to learn. It's getting better and better than doctors. In many cases, they're looking at scans and predicting seizures. And again, on all these areas, they're getting better and better as time goes on, right? It's even being used, believe it or not, to identify victims of domestic abuse. Because a lot of times people come into an emergency room and they got an injury and they say it happened because, if this happened, it turns out it's not true. And the humans can't always detect it, but the machines can because they've got all the data from all the other people who have done similar things all across the country and across the world. Really fascinating, right? Unbelievable. And all sorts of medical imaging applications. It's all object and image recognition, right? We can use it to lower risk. It's even being used when people are submitting claims, right? The machines can look at the photograph and understand basically what it's looking at least to be able to categorize it, right? It's not like it's a finished job, but instead of requiring 20 man hours to process, or person hours, I should say, to process 100 claims, I don't know what those numbers are, okay? But maybe it only takes 50 person hours, right? And then maybe in another 10 years, it'll only take 20, right? It just gets slowly better and better. But where's the big one for object and image recognition? Right, we've talked about a few, but the huge one is in autonomous driving. This is coming so much faster than people think. It's crazy how quickly this is coming. So, and that's going to have a direct effect, of course, on car insurance and injuries as a result of track. So I want to go into this. I know it's not directly related, but it's kind of indirectly related to your industry. So fascinating. So what's the most complex environment for an autonomous vehicle, right? Most obstacles, most unforeseen situations. Well, that's in city driving, right? That's where you're going to get the most number of obstacles, right? So who's making a play in that space? Well, of course, you've got Google's Waymo, and they've got about 10 million miles of data, driving data from their cars. You've got about 6,000 cars. So they've got roughly 10 million miles of data to work with. But then you got Tesla, they have 1 billion miles of data accumulated because they got 100,000 cars on the road full of sensors, right? Data's the game. Guys, everyone's looking for data, right? Why did Facebook pay $19 billion for WhatsApp? They wanted the data. And all the kids were leaving Facebook because their parents were on it. You wanted to spend time on Instagram and WhatsApp. So what did Facebook do? They bought Instagram and WhatsApp. Now they've got the data, right? That data is worth everything. What's the number one thing machine learning needs? Data, right? And so you've got these electric cars. It's crazy. There's Uber's making a big play. And then if you go to China, China is doing incredible things, guys. Amazing. When I speak over there, it's incredible what they're doing. Unbelievable. So this is the Uber equivalent in China. It's called Didi. They've got a huge play, right? They can do anything. Now, because there's very little regulation. That's the thing. Like you go to Europe, they got GDPR, right, with the right to be forgotten and data privacy and everything, and I respect that. But then you go to the opposite side of the spectrum, and you got China. There's no regulations. They got a surveillance state. They got more data than anybody. So guess what? Their machine learning is learning faster. And again, I'm not saying we should go to that model, but we should all be aware of the dichotomy between the two. Right? The GDPR is a respectable effort, but it's hindering the innovation when you compare it to China. Okay? Anyway, how do these things learn? And this is where it gets super fascinating. So Tesla introduced their autopilot function in 2015. That's when that started. And the hardware was already on the cars. So there was like 50,000 cars that already had the hardware when they made the announcement. So there was a guy, I lived in the Bay Area for 18 years. I moved south of there now. But anyway, he lives in the Santa Cruz Hills, which is a beautiful area. And on the way to his house, there's like a really tight hairpin corner. This isn't it. I just bought an image, okay? But you get the idea. So that first night, they made the announcement, and he's driving home from work, approaching this tight corner, and he took his hands off the wheel. He's like, all right, let's see what you got. Not sure I would have done it, but anyway, so the car didn't crash, like it did it, but it veered outside of the lane, and of course the brakes came on and warning lights and the whole thing. So it's basically a fail. And then the next day he did it again, and again, and again, and again. 2 weeks later, the car knew how to take the corner. But it wasn't just his Tesla that knew how to take the corner. It was every Tesla. Guys, this is it right here. Seriously. They call it fleet learning. This is why it's so crazy. Okay, you go to Sand Hill Road in the Bay Area, all the VC. This is all they're talking about: network effect, fleet learning, right? Because if you can take the individual experience of individual people on the network and upload that data to the cloud, that's the genius of the cloud, where the true intelligence is up here. Then you can fix the problem and deploy network-wide. Network-wide. Dude, I'm a nerd, seriously. Like, I get shivers when I think about this stuff. Because, anyway, but it's true. And so, in other words, the improvements are accelerating at an accelerating rate. Like, it's going really quick. People don't realize how quick it's going. It's moving really quick. So, city driving's got the most number of obstacles, right? What's got fewer obstacles than city driving? Well, you can go on the freeways. That has less obstacles, right? So just about 2 years ago now, Auto did the POC, proof of concept with, Auto was purchased by Uber. So they ran this truck 125 miles down the freeway in Colorado. There was a guy in the cab, but he wasn't driving. Payload was 50,000 cans of Budweiser. Got there on time. And there's all sorts of, 47% of trucking fees are the driver's salary. 47%. That means the first one to deploy has a 2-to-1 price advantage. It's going to go quick. Once the first person deploys, it's going to go fast. Right? Tesla's got a model. This is the Mercedes concept. And Volvo, so check this out. If you don't need a driver, you don't need a cab. So they came out with this. Look at that. I mean, this stuff is coming. I bet, and look, if I'm wrong, you can call me out. I'm cool. I bet that at least one state in the union, in our country, will legalize hub-to-hub, long-haul autonomous trucking by the end of this year. And if not by the end of this year, next year, for sure. USPS has got a POC running right now. Some of you are nodding. You've heard that story. They're doing it right now. They're doing 5 trips to, I forget where they're going. Does anyone know? Anyway, they're doing 5 round-trip trips. There's going to be a safety driver in the cab, but the person doesn't have to be driving. Pretty crazy. It's going to come really fast. Now, what's got fewer obstacles than freeways? Agricultural land, right? Look at this thing. This thing is badass. Like, I would love to buy one of these myself. I mean, I'm not even kidding. Look at this. Look at the wheels on it. It's incredible. And the things that, you go to the combines in Iowa, they're satellite driven today. That's legal today. We're already past that hurdle. Right? You can map your property down to the square inch, get these things to come online at 2 a.m. when it's colder outside, less stress on the plants. You're asleep. Are you kidding? It's awesome. It's unbelievable. This stuff's happening already today, and the same thing's happening in the mining industry. We've got these insane trucks, autonomously driven, right? They're more accurate than humans. Incredible. So really all we're waiting for is regulatory approval. This stuff's going to happen really quick. I bet 2022, 2023 it's going to start. And if I'm wrong, you can call me out. I've been wrong many times. But I think there's a lot of reasons to believe 2023 is when it starts. It'll start in the city centers. It'll take a while to get to rural America. Keep in mind, companies like Uber and Google are going to take Wall Street money and buy 100,000 cars at a time. It's not like we have to wait for individuals to replace their cars with electric autonomous cars. That's not the way it's going to work. Uber will come in and buy 100,000 vehicles and just flood the streets, right? And we're done. It's over. Right? The whole thing happens really quick. And it's 70% of the, it's not, I mean, you know, it doesn't go from 1 to 100 overnight, but I bet you anything it'll go from 1 to 50 or 60 within 5 years. Within think like San Francisco or New York or something like that. It could go quick. So and then you have natural language processing, which is another huge piece. And I know many of you are working with natural NLP. They call it NLP because there's all sorts of applications there. Siri was introduced, of course, in 2011, and we've got Amazon Alexa, and that came out in 2015, and now, of course, we've got Google Home. So just out of curiosity, how many of you here today have either Amazon Alexa or Google Home in your homes? Look at that. That's incredible. Yeah, that's awesome. So where's the biggest financial incentive? That's what you always have to, to see where it's going to propagate first. It's always, where's the largest financial incentive? And the call centers, I'm sure many of you have huge call centers, and there's companies that have like thousands, even tens of thousands of people working in call centers. What a nightmare to manage that and hire all these people. And they're calling in sick, and you got to train them, and consistent protocol delivery. It's a nightmare. Imagine how much easier it would be to have a computer run that, and we're close to it. We're getting close to that, right? But it can also be used for medical billing, data entry. Whether it's written notes by doctors or recorded messages, it can be used in that capacity. It's being used to identify people who might be suffering from depression and anxiety, even suicide, because they're finding patterns in the way people speak. They can hear a speech pattern, right? You can do an automated interview, and the way people answer questions. I don't know what it is they're seeing, but the way people speak can be a very good indicator that they might be suffering from depression. Incredible, right? So these are all super disruptive technologies, right? So let's and again, I've got basically 20 minutes left. So let's take a few minutes and talk about blockchain as well. And I know that many of you know a lot about blockchain already, which is awesome. And I certainly don't want to be repetitive, but let me just, obviously blockchain's the technology behind Bitcoin. I'm not going to talk about that, although Bitcoin has more than doubled so far this year, so it's doing well from its low. But I want to talk just briefly about structurally how blockchain works. And again, I know some of you know this, but stay with me on this, because it's a lot of people explain it as if though it's like this really complicated thing, and it's not really. It's quite simple in many ways. So in the simplest analysis, just imagine an Excel spreadsheet, right? But with transactions listed on it. But instead of that spreadsheet being on one computer, it's actually on hundreds or thousands of different computers simultaneously. They're called nodes, right? And all those nodes have to agree through a consensus mechanism that they all have the latest, most up-to-date version, right? So it's effectively a distributed ledger. And it makes it really hard to hack, because you can't just hack one node and get away with it. You have to hack like 51% of the nodes at the same time, in the same way, all successfully, in order for the hack to actually be successful. But it gets even better than that, because every new, and here's the essence of blockchain, every time a new block is added to the chain of previous blocks, right? So a new spreadsheet is added to the chain of spreadsheets, right, effectively. The latest block has a summary of what was on the previous block. It's called a hash, right? Which means that once something is on the blockchain, you can never change it, because now you have to hack every subsequent block on 51% of the nodes all at the same time, all in the same way, all successfully, for the thing to actually work. And just if you're curious, nobody to date, Bitcoin blockchain launched in 2009, no one has hacked the Bitcoin blockchain. They've hacked wallets and exchanges that interact with the Bitcoin blockchain, but no one has ever successfully and believe me, everybody has tried. There's a ton of money. Do you guys remember just recently, the CEO, Canadian guy, CEO of a company, he went to India to do some humanitarian work. He ended up passing away over there. He got sick and passed away. He was the only one who had the key to a wallet that has $190 million in it. No one can get at it. You can see it. Everyone can see it. It's on the public blockchain. No one can get at it. Like, that's, how crazy is that? Same thing is true for the DAO hack in 2014 or 2015. I can't remember. 50 million bucks. It's still sitting there. No one's touched it. Everyone can see it. It's crazy. So effectively, blockchain is just a software architecture. All it is a software architecture that records transactions in a new way, but it does it in such a way that it automates trust. So blockchain automates trust, right? It does it on its own. There's no human involved. It's just a way of recording transactions, but the way it's done makes tampering and hacks virtually impossible. Okay? So POCs on that. One of the early winners with blockchain was in supply chain management. And I know you guys are doing some stuff with digital identity, but this is an interesting POC. It involved 88 bales of cotton, right, produced in Texas and shipped over to China. And all the details of that transaction were uploaded to a private Ethereum-based blockchain using what's called a smart contract. Right? Smart contract is just a contract that has if-then statements in it. So if you get here, if A happens, go this way. If B happens, go that way. And then you've got another one. If C happens here, D. And all the permutations, basically a decision tree. It's just a piece of code. But it's got all the permutations, all the possible outcomes of an order. And they upload that to the blockchain so no one can change it. Right? And then when the cotton gets all the way to China and the barcodes are scanned, that automatically transferred ownership and releases payment. It just happens on its own. There aren't any people involved. Right? So if you want to understand smart contracts, just imagine wills and contracts that effectively execute themselves. But this has a huge implication for supply chains, because a transaction like that, right? So you've got the company, you've got the producer of cotton, right? You've got a trucker to get it to the port. You got loader, that's a different company. It's probably customs clearance at that point. Now you're on the boat. There's probably a dozen companies involved in that one way or another. And on the other side, you've got an offload, you got another customs clearance, and you got trucker. So there's probably 20 companies involved in the transaction, one way or another. And every one of those companies, just like all of your companies, have order entry people and order trackers and project management people. And of course, after the fact, you've got audit and compliance people. Those are all salaries, right? Those are people getting paid to do that work. And that's baked into the pricing. And everyone's got their hand in the cookie jar. So there's an enormous amount of cost that just goes to all these transactions, all these people that are involved. You can replace virtually all of it. Maybe not all of it, but you slowly but surely you can approach that over a period of time. So you can have all the individual participants in the transaction. They would all be maintaining their own private node on this private blockchain. So when an order is uploaded, everyone looks at it and says, yeah, this is what we agreed to. Upload. Now it's on the blockchain, so they're all connected to the blockchain. And if you pay for this stuff at the end using a cryptocurrency instead of a bank, you can eliminate the bank altogether. It's really crazy. There's huge implications for that. Right? And there's a lot of people who are getting close to deploying when it comes to, even like in the car business, you can have different people connected through a blockchain, or if you're in the real estate business, you can have people connected through the blockchain. Really fascinating. And you can monitor the transactions as they go through, because people are checking in as different milestones are reached. So there's a startup that came up that was doing a blockchain-based tracking ledger for diamonds. They were people are trying to avoid blood diamonds and the like, so they're following precious stones from the mine all the way to retail. And the whole thing worked so well, and people loved it so much that now that same company is doing the same thing to monitor RX medications, pharmaceutical medications. They're doing it in Europe to track GMO foods, right? Blockchain can be used to keep track of people's degrees and certifications. Right, it's an interesting application. Of course, it can be used to monitor land ownership and title. Right, and recently, I know there's a few folks here from Accenture. Accenture did a project in conjunction with Microsoft building the ID 2020, which was a pretty astonishing. It's basically a biometric database, it's similar in a sense to what you guys are building with blockchain right now. There's some similarities, but the bottom line is it was mostly for Syrian refugees. So they could, with nothing more than a smartphone, they could prove who they are and where they came from. And so that entitles them to certain benefits. And you want to make sure you're not giving the same benefit to the same person twice and the whole thing. So that's what, one of the use cases. And so in insurance, you have a huge KYC universe of applications as well. So these are, again, examples of disruptive innovation. Right, things that are just disrupting. And then this is the last thing I'm going to touch on, and then I've got just a few slides at the end. So just, if you want to get an idea where we're at. But because there's two types, I would say largely there's two types of innovation. There's more than that, but there's two big buckets, and it's incremental innovation and disruptive innovation. And incremental innovation, that comes like from the center of expertise. Right, so you've got specialists and experts and scientists and people that are calibrating and making things a little bit better every year, year after year. And this is incredibly powerful. Like our world, we are optimizing our planet, and it's a function of incremental innovation. I'm not denigrating this at all. It's an incredible process that's happening. But that's not disruptive innovation. Right? Disruptive innovation invalidates existing business models. Like it comes in with something so new and so different, it just pulls the rug out from an entire classic example. Who developed the digital camera? Kodak. Imagine. Kodak, the very company that got wiped out by digital cameras, they developed it. But they looked at it and they were like, oh, this thing's a piece of garbage. No one's going to want it. It's big and clunky, expensive, super low resolution. They didn't understand the exponential nature of these things. Right? So they let it go. And then it went off and it started getting better and better and better. Next thing you know, it comes back and takes them out. Crazy. Right? So you have like these kind of, again, classic examples. There's tons of them. Apple disrupted the music business, right? Apple disrupted the phone business. And then, of course, Google disrupted the phone business as well. So disruptive innovation comes from what I refer to as adjacent markets. Right, it comes from the sides. It doesn't come from the center. It comes from the sides. Right? What's an adjacent market? Think about what's your biggest supplier. Who else do they sell to? That's an adjacent market. Right? Who's your biggest customer? Who else do they buy from? That's an adjacent market. So you have these industries that are kind of side by side, but they're not the same, but they kind of overlap in places, right? And the disruptive innovation comes from those overlaps. Right? They come from the sides. That's why people miss them. These are smart people. Some of these executives in Fortune 500 companies, my gosh, they're the smartest people in the world. Quite often they get caught off guard because they're focused on the center. Right? They call it institutional blindness, by the way. There's a whole study on this. The people, after just 3 weeks in a given organization, you start to lose perspective on things outside of your space. And that's where the disruption comes from. So again, tons of examples, right? The Facebook Messenger disrupted the SMS business. And of course, that's what WhatsApp did as well, and that's what Snapchat is doing. LinkedIn disrupted the recruiting business, right? That's an adjacent market, right? Amazon disrupted the book business with their Kindle e-reader. It wasn't the first e-reader. So Jeff Bezos, that guy from Amazon, he's brilliant. It's incredible how. So he said, the only thing that's truly disruptive is customer adoption. Because if people don't adopt it, no disruption happened, right? So there were other e-readers before the Kindle, but they never got broad market adoption. He brings out the Kindle, they bring out the Kindle, broad market adoption, all of a sudden the whole book business is different. It was an adjacent market, right? And Uber's disrupting the food delivery business, right? It's a huge thing in China. They've got huge. And then Amazon's getting into the grocery business, right? Tesla and Google getting into the car business. 15 years ago, no one would have believed that. And here we are. And Facebook wants to disrupt the ISP business with these planes. They're solar powered. They fly at 70,000 feet. They can be up there for months at a time with internet access to the people below. Unbelievable. And Google's trying to do the same thing with the Project Loon. And just last week, Starlink, it's owned by Tesla, sent up 60 satellites. They're going to create a constellation of 12,000 satellites. Guys, if he pulls that off, he's got a lower cost structure than anyone else in rockets, so it's cheaper for him to get them up there. He's going to have internet access across the whole world. Elon Musk will be one of the most powerful people on this planet if he pulls that off. You think Huawei is tricky? He would have the whole thing. It's incredible. Right? So disruptive innovation comes from those overlaps, right? And it's in places where people don't want to look, or they think it's like the crazy, sketchy stuff on the side, so they don't bother looking. So what's the bleeding edge, the cutting edge of nutritional supplements? Right? Think about what's the leading edge of nutritional supplements. It's in horse racing. Right? That's where they test the latest supplement. It makes sense. It's less regulated. You got $1 million on the horse, he's not quite good enough to win. You'll try anything to see if it'll work. That's where a lot of that stuff, that's where they tested, that's where creatine started. Some of you probably I take creatine. That started in horse racing. Right? That's where they tested D3, or the impact of zinc loading on testosterone. That all started in horse racing. It's not the only place, but it's one of the places where things happen. And then when it proves that it's got some effect, some of it starts to migrate in. Right? What's the cutting edge of online marketing? Guys, it's in porn. Right? It's in online gambling. Right? That's where they test the latest wireframes and lead magnets and conversion funnels. All that stuff happens in those kind of sketchy parts of the internet that no one wants to talk about. But that's where all the gurus that are selling $1,000 info products, those guys do all this stuff first. Tripwires and all that stuff. It all comes over there. So disruptive innovation comes from the sides. And there's one more I want to touch on, and I'll be done in 8 minutes here, but fascinating. So this comes from that book, Innovator's Dilemma. I forget the author's name. What's the author of that book? Innovator's Dilemma. Nope? Okay, doesn't matter. Disruptive innovation tends to cater to the least profitable market segment first. Right? So think about your business. What's your least? We're talking about the customers you hate the most. Oh, they're such a pain in the neck. They have no money. They call twice as often as anybody else. You know the ones, right? Every industry has them. You'd almost be happy if they'd go away entirely, right? And what do they want? They want simpler, less expensive solution, right? That's disruptive innovation in your industry. Simpler, less. What do people really do? And this is true in every industry. They cater to the most profitable industry segment, market segment, which is at the top. They're selling premium products, which is good. There's money there. There's good profits there. You're selling premium products, service packages, all sorts of stuff that's high margin stuff. You need that money, right? Because innovation costs, innovation can be really summarized in one concept, 2 words: budgeting failure. You got a budget failure. Right? You got to, Jeff Bezos again, if you know it's going to work, it's not an experiment. I mean, this stuff's brilliant, right? If you want to innovate, it implies you're trying something when you don't know if it's going to work or not, which means it might fail, which means you need a budget for it. Where do you get that money from? You get that money from selling premium products, right? That's where the money comes from. So you have this pervasive upward push. It happens in every industry as everyone's trying to sell these premium high-end products, and who gets left behind? Right? It's the people at the bottom, right? The least profitable market segment. That's where disruptive innovation comes from. So I do these strategy sessions all the time with with company people, and I always tell them to look up, look down, look side to side. Right? Look up. That's where the profit is. Right? That's where the premium. You need gross profit. You need gross margin. Right? That stuff is super important. You need that money if you're going to innovate. Right? But then at the same time, look down. That's where disruptive innovation comes from. You could do a meeting once a month on a Friday afternoon when things are slow and just have a brainstorming session. What do these people want? Who's playing? Who's trying to capture that business, right? And then finally, look side to side to those adjacent markets, right? You come back to where we started from. Who else's lunch can we eat, right? Those are new revenue opportunities, right? Stay on offense. We got to stay on offense. What can you do with data analytics, right? What can you do with machine learning? And what can you do with blockchain? My message for you today is just to think way bigger about what's possible and what you could be doing, right? And what your competitors could be doing. And when you think bigger, like there's a few things you can kind of take for granted. The first one is that you end up inspiring everyone around you. You have a big, what was the guy on the panel said the bricklayer. And the second guy was like, yeah, I'm picturing the castle on the roof. It's inspiring to him, right? That's the whole point. You have a big goal like that. You have some big goal that you're doing. We're going to revolutionize our industry. Do you want to be a part of it? People are like, yeah, absolutely. Right? Your employees, your customers get inspired. Even your competitors get inspired when you're doing something big. And if you do something that no one else has done, you've got no competition because no one else has done that yet. So there's a whole... there's a ton of people, obviously, that are known for kind of thinking this way. I'm a big, I love quotes. I literally buy books of quotes, and this guy's got like thousands of great quotes. So here's my favorite Richard Branson quote. Fastest way to become a millionaire is to start out as a billionaire and then start an airline. It's genius. Anyway, so he started Virgin Galactic. Like, how much bigger are you going to get than that, right? Any competition? Not much. Then you got Elon Musk. I mean, this guy is like a hero to me. I mean, I know he has his haters, and there's 200 people. I'm sure some of you don't like him, and that's cool. I love him. I mean, to me, he's like, it's hard to believe that he exists. I mean, it's like he spends his entire life doing impossible things. But anyway, I mean, he started Tesla, he started SpaceX. By the way, how many of you watched this? The Falcon Heavy has launched twice. How many of you have watched, either live or on YouTube, even one of those two launches? Love you guys. And for the rest of you, if you're into this even that much, like if you're a nerd that much, go to YouTube and search for Falcon Heavy launch. It's a 12-minute video, right? It's because they're reusing the hardware, right? They're sending the rocket up, and then they take these boosters back down and land them simultaneously like pencils on the landing pad, right where they took off from 11 minutes earlier. It's so crazy. I'm telling you, I'm a nerd. It's obvious, okay? But it's true. This stuff puts shivers down my spine. How do you do that? Because here's the thing. Cost of sending a Falcon 9 to the ISS, the International Space Station, is about $60 million. $60 million. How much is the fuel? Top line is 60 million. How much is the fuel? I guessed 10 million. That was my guess. 10 million bucks. The right answer is $200,000. 1/300th of the total cost. Which means if you can reuse the hardware, you can bring the cost function down 100-fold. Do you know how crazy that is? It's insane. And now, so the cost function, I mean, NASA's paying $133 million per launch by contract. If they're able to reuse the fuselage and the booster, their cost function's like 20 million bucks. That means they make 110 million profit because they've got superior technology. They just priced it underneath the competition. That's all they needed to do to get the order. Didn't matter that the cost was down here. That means they make a fortune. What does that money go to? It goes to Starlink. It goes to the BFR. It goes to Starship. It goes to all this crazy innovation. They're funding it. Does this make sense? This is what the whole game is about, right? You got to get your premium products so you can get your hands on some gross profit, and then you got to budget failure and innovate like crazy. And it's just going to get faster and faster. So the first time they pulled this off was right just before Christmas in 2015. And when they pulled it off, their employees partied like it was 1999. Can you believe it? 27 years old, average age. That makes them millennials. Millennials get a bad rap, don't they? Lazy, apathetic, entitled. It's not true. Those millennials will work harder than anyone you've ever hired if you give them something inspiring to work towards. They're not millennials, they're just young people, right? We all wanted to do that when we were in our 20s and 30s, right? Anyone who's under 40 is a millennial. They're not kids anymore. They're half the workforce, right? They want to do something cool, right? They want to change the world or populate another one. So crazy. So all these stories, right? We've all heard these stories before. At the end of the day, my presentation isn't really about technology per se. It's not about artificial intelligence or blockchain. It's about leadership. Like, who's willing to see the market structure for what it is, right? You need gross profit so you can innovate, and innovate, like run towards it, right? Stay on the right side of that leverage equation at all cost, because otherwise you're swimming upstream, right? And just think way, way bigger about what's possible. So anyway, it's a crazy day for me. I flew in this morning. I don't even have a hotel. I'm flying out tonight. I'm back home, Newport Beach. I just moved to Newport Beach last August. So beautiful. But I'm delighted to be here, and I'm going to be here until the car is picking me up at 10 after 3. My favorite part of my job is talking to people after. And sometimes people correct me. Sometimes people have stories, or they have questions, or anything like that. I would love to hear it. I'll be hanging out. And I really appreciate your attention for my session. Thank you.